My name's Will Lethen, and I'm stuck in a house because it's in the middle of January and I have COVID. So I thought I would make some lures. A couple years ago, I made some bass plugs that look like this, and they're kind of a frog-looking thing, and they work really good because they float, and I have a little weight put down in them there so that they orient themselves in the water correctly. They just have worked really, really good. I have a wire that goes all the way through them, so that if this wood that they're made out of, which is basswood, would ever break for any reason, which they never have, the wire would still catch the fish. But it starts out, I had a tree that was a basswood tree growing in the yard, and I cut it down. And I thought, I knew people carved things from it, so I took my chainsaw and I made a bunch of pieces of wood that looked like this out of it. And I let it sit for a couple of years. And then I cut it into smaller and smaller pieces. And finally got it down to the point where I had pieces like this, which are just blanks for making these lures. Next thing I did was took it over in a lathe, and I'll show you that next, and cut it. And I made it into a bunch of pieces like this on the lathe. And I'll get to that part next, but where I'm going to go show you how I did it with the lathe, how I cut them in two, and so forth, and the reasoning behind that. So let's go do that. Then I take these lure blanks, and I chalk them up in a lathe here and turn them around. Now, it seems like another way that you could do this is that you could just buy a piece of dowel from a hardware store. I don't want to do that. I want to know that it came from a tree that I grew myself. And basswood has a good grain for making lures anyway. Like I say, it's a little hard to do when you got one hand holding the camera. Hopefully it won't result in hospitalization. Notice how I'm tapering it on each end. Get too carried away. Anyway, it's important, get a pointer here, that you leave these ends on, because these ends give you a reference spot, something that's flat and that's square. From when I cut the original blanks out. You want to have that so that during the next step, which I'll show you here, where I take this on the bandsaw and I cut it in half. Before I do that, I have to go and drill some holes in here to put the weights so that when the lure lands in the water, it'll orient itself the correct way in relation to the cut on the lure that guides the lure under the water. These lures are nice because they'll hit the water and they'll float, and you can twitch them a little, and then when you retrieve them, they go under the water just a few inches, and that's perfect for the fishing that we do, which is mostly pike. And they start out like this. this one here, I only did one end because it looked like it had a crack in it. But I do two ends, so this is actually going to turn out to be two lures. They're going to be small, and you'll see how I do that. So now you got this whole thing going on. And you take a pencil and mark about where the middle of it is. And here's where it comes into play, where it's important that you have this flat spot on here still left. Is that when you set that on something, let's say I'll set it on this piece of wood here. Let me turn around so that I can see my line. I can decide where to drill a hole. And this hole will be for putting a sinker in. You can see these sinkers. And that means that the lure, when it hits the water, it won't be upside down. It'll always right itself. And this lip right here will have the correct angle, being the jutting out part of the lip will be on the bottom, and thus cause the lure to dive when you retrieve it. So it's not really anything that technical. Let me scoot up here a little bit so you can see it easier. And this probably isn't the safest thing in the world to do. That's it. I make sure the hole is deep enough. Make sure it's deep enough. Now I take the thing and I flip it around to the other side, because remember, this is going to be two lures. So let's see, transfer my line to about right here. And take another drill. This is probably dangerous because it could go through your hand. You had a drill press, much better way of doing it. Looks deep enough. Does not look deep enough. Okay, so here you have the blank that I've turned on the lathe, and it has two holes. You can see where it'll be two lures. When I cut it, this side here will be at an angle. The angle, let me draw that on the pencil with a pencil. The angle that I cut that at will be like this, and then the piece that'll be left will be the opposite of it. But because the weight hole is on opposite sides, the lip will be in the correct orientation. The lip being this red part of the lure. But remember, these are a lot littler, so they're hard to do. It's harder to do the littler ones. But I'll go ahead and I'll drill the rest of the holes. Don't really get carried away with measuring a lot, because I want each lure to be slightly different than the other one. I don't want it to become too much of a process, so that they're like an assembly line item, and I want every lure to be like, when I turn them on the lathe, I don't take calipers and measure them. Some are narrower, some are wider. That way I make a bunch of lures and they're all slightly different and I feel like they're handcrafted and half-made. But once again, you can see the role that these flat spots that I've left serve. And this is something you wouldn't have if you had a lure that you were making out of a piece of dowel. You wouldn't have those flat corners. This helps me to have the drill hole oriented more towards the top. One's there. This one's here. I don't have a super sharp drill bit. I do have a super sharp drill bit, but I'm not using a super sharp one because I don't want that drill to dig in and drill a hole all the way through it. I'll spare you and not show you me doing the other two. Okay, so here we go. Next part of it's to take the bandsaw and to cut this baby right in two with its two holes. You can see I just kind of line it up kind of so it's in the middle and put a little fence on here, and then here we go. Get my glove on because it's freezing cold. Okay, again, you can see the role of having these square ends right here, so that when I put this on here, I can have something for the fence to ride up on. So now I have these two halves, and I'll spare you me cutting these other ones, but see what I got going on here so far. Now, on to the next step. Do this here quick. And this step, I'm sure you'll all think, well, this is very dicey. And I would agree with that. But I thought of different ways of doing it. And that is to say, putting a line down the middle of these lures. So you can see how I kind of put matching sets together with rubber bands, so that I know this piece goes with this piece, and that it ends up looking like this. Again, paying attention to this square part still being on it from the lathe and this square part being on it from the lathe. I've set the depth of this blade on the table saw to be about maybe 1/16 of an inch. And you can see how, because I still have those ends, I can run it up against the fence here. And I can put just a little line on this one in the going through the middle, and a little line on this one going through the middle. And hopefully, if I align it correctly, they'll match. So again, I position this thing. You probably can't see it here. Half the lights won't turn on because it's only 10 degrees outside. Let me try turning another one up. They're fluorescents, and some of them aren't meant for the cold. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the saw on, and because I still have these edges, I'm going to put like a little stick against it, and then I'm going to push it through here, making sure to not cut my fingers off. And I can use this a little bit, but generally what I end up doing is holding it and pushing it with a different one, different piece. So let's do this thing. So again, here you go. Here's what you end up with. So if you think this looks dicey, you're absolutely correct. It's a very scary thing to do, and I could easily see where you could hurt yourself doing this, so I'm being very careful. But that's how you do it. Okay, the next step, believe it or not, you can see where that line runs about in the middle, but maybe not exactly in the middle. So later, what I'm going to do is I have some carving tools, and what I'll do is I'll carve that out to be a little deeper, using the center line as a gauge, and then I'll try and make it perfectly in the middle, or as close as I can, just by eye. Well, the next thing to do now is to take some glue and get the glue to come out. Yuck. Hope it's not poisonous. Okay, and I put glue on it, but I only put the glue on those ends that a lot of you have already realized are already going to get cut off. So I line it up as best I can here. Take a clamp, put it together, make sure it's pretty darn close, and then just clamp it together. And this part that I've cut in half and put the groove down the middle, you can see when both lines match, when both grooves in the middle match, they make a hole that's, one hole's kind of in line with the other. So you know that that's pretty darn close to the middle. And there's also punch marks on this from where the lathe was. And so I can use that as a guide. So yeah, I'll do that with all of these. I got a bunch of them. And I won't bore you with that. So, okay. I left those dry for a few minutes, and I just have 4 examples here. And let me run you through this. The first thing I'm going to do is I've messed up before, and this little pocket here is where there's going to be some weight, and I want the angle of this cut to go this way. I don't know if you can see this. And so just so I don't mess up on the table saw, I'm just going to draw about where I want the cut and what angle I want it. Now you can see this one only has one, is only going to be one lure. Now, you can see this is not perfect. That little bit of it off. Big deal. And there you have the next step. Two little pieces like this. Again, there you go. As I break the first thing I want to do before I even those out is I want to take a Dremel tool or a half round file. You can see this, or some type of tool such as this one I have on the end here, and do something to make this surface here concave. I always feel that these lures, you want them to be very erratic when you retrieve them. It seems like you catch a lot more fish when they're erratic, but you don't want them so erratic that they're uncontrollable. So you don't want to make a real deep dish or anything like that. But probably the easiest way to do it, and you could even do it with a big round one like that. But because these lures are so much smaller than the other ones that I've always made, let's say for instance this lure. These are the ones I started with. This has a wire running all the way through it, but then a screw eye in down here at this middle one. These are a lot easier to make, these big ones. These little ones are kind of hard. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of take this and just hollow this hole. Just make it slightly concave. I don't think you'll be able to see it on the camera. But take that and just hollow that out. I'll do this one a little more later. So now we can see that this one, which I've hollowed just a little bit, has those channels very uneven. And I look at it and I go, well, where would I rather have the wire loop coming out? Would I rather have it coming out in the top one, the one that's higher up on the lure, or the bottom one? And in this case, as I look at it, I think that the middle is about halfway in between them. So I take this, remember this is only glued on this end, and I break this lure in two. This end here that was glued is going to get cut off anyway. And I have some carving tools. And I have a whole set of carving tools, and they look things like this. Now you can also use a chisel. But on this one I go, well, on this side I want to go up a little more. So I'll take this. It has to be wider anyway for the wire to fit in. Okay, that one. Now this one needs to go up a little more this way. And this channel makes it really nice. I mean, this is really soft wood, this basswood. And this channel that I've cut in it makes it super easy to do. Put this back together now. And now you can see how, because I've gone up on one and down on the other, that the holes are in the same spot. And likewise, as you're maybe going to have a wire run through this, like I made a bunch of these. I don't know if you can see these on the camera. Let me see if I can find one that's more finished. Something like this. And as you're laying this in here to try and figure out where the loop is going to be, let me hold that up there as best I can. A lot of times this mouth of it that I just widened will have to be bigger anyway, because that's kind of where the knot in the loop is. You see where I'm going with this? I'm going to take this one down here. This is going to, the lure is going to end about right here. So I'm going to take and make another loop right here. And then I'll make sure that these fit before I glue it together. And I take some epoxy. I like using JB Weld. You know, because I did show you this piece of wire that I have that has a loop on each end. And obviously it's way longer than the lure that I'm going to put it in. And it's just easy for me to do that ahead of time. And then I can kind of size it up. But I want to show you how to do that loop. And I think you can use regular needle nose pliers. I happen to have gotten some wire at the hardware store. You want something that's fairly stiff and doesn't bend super easy, or the loop that you have on the end of your lure will bend if you get a big fish. But I mean, it's not really rocket science. I have some of these pliers that I got at Netcraft, and I get a lot of supplies at Netcraft, and you can mail away for them. These are pliers that the tines on them are round. So you just take this, and one of the big tricks of making a loop, I think, and I probably don't do a lot of things right, but one of the big tricks is using plenty of wire and just wasting wire. Because if you have more to work with, it's better. You just take the darn thing and bend it around. I usually use just my hands. You know, to start with, you end up like a thing like that. Now, if you even took this and bent it back in and put it in the lure, it would be plenty. It would not ever strip out of there if you caught a fish. I like to take it and just go around once with it, like this, and you end up with something that looks like that. And you just get a big old piece of pair of pliers. I use these things called 9s or lineman pliers. You just cut that off and then go and do one on the other end. Of course, the bigger the lure, the longer the piece. I mean, it's not rocket science. And if you wonder how is that going to ever fit the lure, we're going to make it fit the lure. We're just kind of getting a jump on it. Let me use pliers on this one. See, I did another one. So, here's my lure body. Here it is. Usually I make a whole bunch of those, get them done ahead of time. What I have to decide, the first thing I have to decide is, you know, how long is this lure going to be? And so I'm just going to cut it off, you know, right around here. And then I'm going to take a rasp, which is a kind of a coarse file. Sometimes they call them bastard files. Oh, I think what I'm going to do here is to cut this off. I'm just going to take a little chisel and just cut the back part of it off, giving myself plenty. Check it out. Make the other one approximately the same. Now you could cut this off with a bandsaw or a jigsaw or whatever. You're just getting it close here. So I'm going to take this wire and I'm going to set it in here. And I'm going to decide about how much. And it looks like this one long piece here, I can about cut exactly in two. Remember, I want some wire to work with. Now I got two pieces. Lay it in this lure body. Grab my roundy pliers. And I'm going to want my loop right about there. In fact, I think I'm going to start my loop a little bit further in case I sand some of that off. Same thing. Bend it around. See how it's fairly difficult for me to work with this because I didn't give myself enough wire, but I'm still okay with it. You can't see me doing that. See, if I had a long piece, I could easily push it with my finger. Okay, there you go. Now I have a piece that has two loops on it. And I lay it in here. And I go, gee, this fits about perfect. And you can use power tools if you have a sander handy. I'm just too lazy. So I don't know if you can see it here, but as I've twisted two ends of this, and I'm laying kind of with my finger this wire in here, the channel is not really big enough for the knot on the back one. I mean, that's just all part of the tweaking. And you have this carving tool, or let me show you, just using a knife or anything. You know, and I'll take this. I don't know if you can see me doing this. But being as I have this channel, makes it real nice to work off of. I'll make it a little deeper. Give myself plenty of room. And now I can lay it in there, and I could either do both halves at once, which I probably will do. Just lay the other half in there. See if there's plenty of room. And there is. For the two halves to squeeze together. Yep, it's just fine. And then I'll mix up some JB weld. I'm using JB Quick. I like using the regular JB weld better, or you can just use Elmer's glue. I've never had one break apart, and I've caught some huge fish. It's nice to have these. Get them at the hardware store, one of the big box stores. So I'll go ahead and mix some up. Now these lures, it's important to remember that you don't have to have COVID in order to make them. And again, you don't have to worry if you get the epoxy on the outside of it. Not going to hurt anything because we're going to sand it off, we're going to file it. Anyway. Just clamp it together. See, got it all over my fingers. It's no big deal. There's the lure. And if I'm fast, before the rest of the epoxy dries, I could put some in the hole and do the little split shot at the same time. And just set it aside and let it dry. Move on to the next one. Okay, so again, you know, we got done cutting it on the saw. It looks like this. We drilled the hole in it. And then what I do is I've been using a sanding block, and I also have files here. This is what a half round file looks like. I just take that and take one of these, and you can see it's a real nice little lure body. I have a rounded back to it. Here's the holes in the front. There's the hole for the split shot, and it's still glued in the back. All you gotta do is take a knife or something. You can see the little line in it. Just kind of pry it apart because I just put a very slight amount of glue on there to hold it together so that I could do my thing. We have a store near us called Woodcraft, and I'm sure you can go online and get carving tools. I found these things really nice for making lures. I'm going to show you the set here. I don't think it costs much. See how I have one of them is just a little round cut? It's just like a little circle. Seems like sharper than the Dickens. Definitely will make your fingers bleed if you don't have correct finger placement. Okay, all done with that. And again, take one of these that I made. Take it and approximate the length. Lay it in the groove. Take the pliers, put them right where I want it. Where I want the loop. Bend the loop. Get it straight. Clip it off. Good to go. Okay, it's all ready. I'll see if it fits properly. And it does. Fits right in the groove. One of these little wires, you can't always get if you use stiff wire, this little tip of it to come off. And it's absolutely not necessary either. You just make sure that in your piece that goes on top of it, that there's space to put that. And then you glue it together. I mean the channel that you cut with a table saw. Make sure it's okay. And then glue it together. Same as the other one. I've pretty much got all those things glued up. I don't know if you can see them. Got them all glued up, the ones that have the wire through there. The wire goes through the lure. And now I still have a whole bunch of them that I made here. I'm going to do a couple different ways that sometimes could be easier. One of which is you could just take a drill bit and drill through the lure. And you just kind of keep turning the lure to make sure that it's roughly in line with the axis, the drill bit. And then I have to cut this part. And then do it from the back. And you'll feel the two holes meet up. And again, the thing about handmade deals is that if you can see this, these sides aren't symmetrical. This side has a different curve on it than this one does. But I'll sand that some more and get it close. But the idea is that all of them are slightly different. They might pull to the right, they might pull to the left. They might have a different wobble. But every lure has something about it that's slightly different from the other one. And so I'm going to take all these lures in this box and I'm going to drill a hole through about half of them. And then I'll save a few and I'll show you the third method of putting a wire through them, which is by far the easiest. Okay, another way you can do these things is you just take and just I drill a little pilot hole with a teensy drill bit. Just a little pilot hole. And then you get these things from Netcraft called screw eyes. And you can see how one of them's closed and the other one you have to pinch closed. I've never had any of these open. I've never had any of them come out of a lure. So in the front, or if the lure is long enough, I always use these, and they look like they're more than an inch in length to me. And I take them and I take the one that's closed. Then I take the one that's open and I put it in my drill. Like that. Then I just, because the end is open, I just take it like that and then I just screw it in. Like that. Now this is by far the easiest method, using these screw eyes. And they probably won't come undone for any reason whatsoever. Now there's also these ones, I don't know if you can see them. There's screw eyes that are smaller, which at first I felt were somewhat suspect. I mean, they look like they're about 5/8 of an inch long. And I thought, geez, I don't know. Those look like they could conceivably pull out of there. But we go fishing, we catch humongous fish. And I've never had any pull out. Same thing with the tool and the drill bit. It's just a good device so that you don't have to turn them so long with pliers. Generally, but not always, I like the loop to be vertical. Let's say this is the bottom where the weight goes, and I like the loop to be like this on the front, and generally I like it to be horizontal on the back so that as the natural motion of the lure going back and forth, it'll also swing that hook or you know, whatever the case may be. Like on this one, I'm gonna put a bucktail. You know, now this is not done yet, and I'm gonna round a few things off, but I wanted to, some of these real short ones, I'm gonna make a bucktail, which I'll cover later. But the screw eye method is by far the easiest. And actually, there's nothing wrong with it. I just have these ideas. I'm bored in the winter. Like I say, I have COVID anyway. So, I like to try, I dream up different ideas and I do them. I'm going to take some old, used, wrinkled aluminum foil and I'm going to put around one of them, glue it down around one of them, and then put some red spots on it. You know, you just think of things to do, and I'll show you all of that. Okay, so got all that done, and I end up with a lure that's got the glue on it, you know, in various places. I kind of sand this down with that mill file, that half-round mill file. Put some, make sure that there's no water that's getting in anywhere. And then I have just a little cobbled together thing that there was some sticks laying around here. So I just screwed together this little rack, and then I take the lure and I cover it with shellac. Now, I don't think you would have to do this, it just kind of seals it. I want to make sure that there's no water ingress into this lure because we use it for days on end. I take some, before I do this, of course, I take some sandpaper and a file and I get it all looking like I want it to look. I don't have to really be that careful with this because I'm going to give it a light sanding. Before I couldn't put any coats of paint on it. This is just to seal it. And there you go. It's sealed. And I wanted to mention that in the doing of the shellac on these things, I generally do this. I have a bunch of these clamps and they're kind of handy for just putting it on this rear eyelet of the lure and painting it. You know, I like how this stuff flows nice and easy, and so around this eyelet, this shellac will flow and seal off any opening that water would get in. I'll generally take this hook here. You can see how that looks. It's just a bent up piece of baling wire or whatever. And I'll take it and I'll put it on this. Hang that right there. And then let me show you this here. And then I take it on my little drying rack. I just hang them there. And that's usually enough for me to do for one day. So anyway, when you get these all shellacked, and then I like to sand the front and paint it red. Usually you need a couple coats, but what I do is I paint it and I let it dry a real long time, the red part. And then I sand it again with a real little tiny piece, where is that, of fine, you know, maybe 200 grit or something. And redo it again. Let me scuff this up so you can see. I spend some time sanding it, and then it highlights the low and the high spots in case from the carving process it's not perfect. And then during the second coat, it kind of fills in some of those low spots and it provides you with a nice surface when you're done. But the next part of it after that is painting it. When you get to that stage and you start painting these lure bodies, it's a very satisfying part of it, because initially, you know, as you take like this crude lure and it has epoxy all over it and it's not painted, and let me see another one like this, they're kind of ugly looking. And then when you get the red lip on them and you get them painted, like let's say one of these, it's satisfying because it just looks kind of like it's getting done here. But this is how the lure ends up looking, and you can see that the different colors are kind of mixed, but underneath it is this tan, you know. And right here on these, they have a lump to where I put the split shot. And then in the smaller lures, because I don't need as much weight, what I've done is I've sanded that bump off of it. Or in this case, with a file, with my half round file, so that it makes it real smooth, and it also makes that weight lighter because obviously if you put the same weight in a smaller lure, it might sink it. Starting the painting process, and you can see how I've got these with clamps so that I'm basically just painting one side of them because I like it to drip. I like the paint to drip. And I like the bottom sides. My thinking here is I want the bottom side to be lighter. Lighter in color. I've got some hung here. But I've just got this, you know, some kind of enamel paint. This is Ace. This is Rust-Oleum. Costs a little more. I don't find one of them to be, for my purposes, any better than the other. Rust-Oleum. When I just painted these, I had already painted them. You can see all a tan color. Not all of them, but tan color to give them kind of a base coat. And then before that, you remember I had the shellac. So now I just put this paint on and you can see that it's like really heavy. I mean, I'm just dripping it on there with a paintbrush and it's running all over the place. You know, usually I make several different kinds at once. This is a black lure that doesn't have any weights in it, that will just float on the surface. And these are really good for when bass are up in there making their nests and everything else. And you just kind of walk it over the surface of the water, and they'll hit this just to defend those nests. But you know, as I'm doing it, I get bored and I go, well, here's some eyeballs. I'll epoxy some eyeballs on one of them, and I think I'll smash up some aluminum foil and then straighten it out again and epoxy it. Of course, I use the clear epoxy for that to the sides. Now this one isn't painted yet, but you know, just experiment, see how it ends up looking. I'll show you that at the end. So you can see how I have the red bill on this thing, and then I take and to get the edge really nice on these, take the paint, the tan paint, I just pull it towards the red area. And then that gives me a nice point of demarcation between the red bill and the body, whatever it ends up being. Like I said when I was talking about painting these, I generally start out with the light tan on the bottom. And you can see how I'm just really gooping it on. It's like really thick and drippy. Dripping down the sides and everything else. And it's the same color as the base coat. And I'll take some green. This is the bottom. And the overall theme is really not a solid green, but kind of a somewhat light color. And that should do it. Then when I get around to the part where I'm doing the top part of the lure, let's say this one, I already did the bottom. I usually do the top. Now I predominate with the green. And I put a whole bunch of green on. Group it on there pretty heavy. Rather not have it be completely green. Try and hit all the spots. But predominantly green. They all turn out a little different. Basically, depending on how you feel about it. So this is gonna kind of, a lot of them are gonna have like a frog pattern. So in order for you to have the round circles, to make the frog pattern, let's say like this one I keep using for an example, you know, it has to be a dark enough color that when you put the circles in, you'll be able to see them. The circles are only on the top. The bottom is lighter colored. So that one lure, it's kind of like the model for all of them. Make sure that all areas get painted. Generally use these little spring clamps, and I set them down on the edge of the table to dry, and then after a while I go along and I touch it with my finger. Once the paint's set up a little. So you can see that on these, it's like this. There's these, let me point to it. I do, you know, paint them every which way I can think of. And then like on this one in particular, I put these beige dots here. And then later I come around with the dark brown and I put it in the middle. You can also use black, but I don't have any black, so I don't want to buy any. But they're just all different shapes and sizes of lures. And I've even done the same thing with blue dots. And I put some kind of beige mixed with blue in there. I've made some that are like this. You know, these are smaller ones, and they'll have a hook with a bunch of stuff tied to it, a rooster tail that's similarly colored, which is mainly orange and red, but it's got kind of dashes on it. Kind of looks like a pike or something, I don't know. And, you know, I have the ones, the long-standing plugs that Grandpa used to have that were red and white, and they're standard. I usually take some of the longer ones and use for those. But just anything you think of. Here's some little lines on the side, just for some ideas, but you just do whatever you want to do. Here's one with almost kind of a lightning bolt kind of by it. But your standard thing that I kind of looked at frogs and do is this is about the most effective length. Is a length about like this, or maybe even a tad shorter, that is greenish, mostly green on top, and a lighter kind of green mixed with beige on the bottom. See, and then I'll repaint this lip red, I'll sand it a little, and then that'll be done except for putting hooks on it. This is like the standard thing that I make more of than anything. But then as you go along, different colors occur to you, and you think, well, why not try it? Here's one that just has all kinds of different colors and a whole bunch of little dashes, because those are what pike have, although pike have a dark brown background, real pike, and they have a lighter colored dash. This is kind of lighter with a darker dash. Not sure if a fish knows the difference, but pike do eat a lot of small pike. That's a common thing that they do. Here's another one like that. This is the one I tried. I put aluminum foil on the side. I gotta still put the dark brown in one of the dots, but I noticed that with fish and with frogs, the bottom of them is always a lighter color. So I don't know if that matters or not. This one's got the eyeballs, the optional eyeball. Buy like this little card of eyeballs at Netcraft. I can just drive there, but most people have to mail away for them. Here's another typical one where the bottom is lighter. The top is mostly green with the dots. I love how sometimes the green and the beige can kind of get smeared. And over that, I lay the beige circles, and then I put the brown dots in the middle of them, which is kind of tedious. But I just like how they look when the paint's kind of mixed together. Doesn't mean you'll like the same thing. A lot of people like to be real precise. I like to be real random. Here's one more of a brownish color on top with the dots that frogs seem to have. I don't really try and make them look like frogs so much as a couple of them I did, in that once I put these hooks back here, these treble hooks, it'll almost look like little, I imagine that to a fish this will look like a frog. I don't know how fish think, but I think I've given you enough examples of what they look like. This is like way lighter on the bottom. This is a lighter shade of beige, but still has the dots. I haven't completed them yet. Okay, and then finally, the last thing I do when I figure a lure is done, I don't know if you can see it from there, when I figure that a lure is done, is I take this stuff here that I bought at one of these box stores. I don't know if it was Home Depot or Lowe's, but Ultra Cover Gloss Clear. And the only instructions I got on this is it might be lacquer. So if the paint isn't completely dry on the lure, then let me point this up a little here. If it's not completely dry on the lure, it'll bubble up. So you want to make sure it's dry. whole thing. This stuff dries really fast, so I kind of rotate it so there won't be any drips anywhere. Because of the variability of the mottled surface of the paint on there, usually it won't be too visible anyway if there is a drip. But if you get it just right in the sun, you can kind of see whether it's doing that or not. Seems like if you just hold it, geez, for 15 or 20 seconds, it'll already set up enough that it won't drip if you hang it on your stand, which I got over there. That's the painting part. The rest of it is mundane. I'll probably show that, but I mean, obviously you have to put the hooks on there, and that's just a matter of a split ring. I'll show that. And the hooks, I'll probably put like a number 3 on this if I have any. Happy with that. That looks really good. Okay. This is my first video. It's probably too long. Hope you liked it.